Welcome to the first in our hopefully now regularly Swing Catalyst webinars. We started these things during the pandemic. So once the world shut down and nobody had anything to do, we started doing these. And we did them weekly throughout the pandemic for, I'm going to say, a good couple months. And then, the world opened up and we kind of, everybody went back to work and we kind of stopped doing them. But we have decided to revamp them and start them again. So this is the first in our hopefully regular line of webinars. We do have another one scheduled for November the 16th, which is 2 weeks from tomorrow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that one. The details of that will be posted so you can sign up for that one as well. It will occur at the same time. All right, so this one we wanted to talk about speed creation. So using the ground to create speed. And I invited three people that I've worked closely with on ground reaction force plates and in different capacities on the Swing Catalyst system. First of all, we have Josh Koch, who is a long driver. He's ranked somewhere in the top 5 in the world in long drive competition. So he actually does it. He tries to swing the club as fast as possible, but also coaches in the Orlando area with regular golfers and people trying to gain speed. So Josh, if you want to just give yourself, I don't know if you want to add anything else to kind of what you do or your introduction.
No, I think you said it well, Scott. I actually fell. I fell to 6, so we had a bad world championship. But yeah, no, I think it's just been interesting over the years looking at how to use the ground more efficiently, some of the mistakes I made along the way, and how I think it can help everyone, no matter what demographic golfer you are.
Good. I actually have some swings here that I just found from that day in Long Beach when you were hitting balls and it was about 40 degrees and raining, and I think you hurt your neck that day. So those might be good to look at to see what, because you have struggled with some injuries. So, and that's one thing I think that is really important to consider when you're trying to add speed, that we keep ourselves safe and we do it as safely as possible for sure. Next, we have Ryan Faust down in San Diego area. Ryan has a very interesting past. I met him when you were working exclusively at La Costa. You kind of set up during the pandemic, right, on that little lawn that they weren't using for weddings anymore, so they lent it out to you. Just introduce yourself a little bit, Ryan. Tell us everyone a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I own Faust Golf Performance Studio here in Encinitas, just north San Diego. Yeah, all about helping golfers get better. So we've got a little bit of gym on the side and then the force plates and really utilize those with beginners all the way to professionals when we're taking a look at it. So it's going to be awesome, today's panel and talking about how it can really help everyone.
Yeah, and I like Ryan. Everyone on this panel are helping regular golfers, not just people trying to gain speed. So Ryan, I know you're consulting with some people that are working with Korn Ferry players and now PGA Tour players. And so it's really important. My goal for this is trying to talk about some of the things we've learned from long drivers, because Josh is a long driver and both Ryan and Bernie have worked with long drivers. But the things we've learned from the long drivers that we can then apply to regular golfers and help them create speed, because most people on this call probably don't work with long drivers. They're probably working more with kind of regular people who just want to hit it a little further. So, and the last member of our panel, Bernie Najar, Director of Instruction at Caves Valley in Maryland, has had a lot of success recently. Coach of the world champion, Kyle Berkshire, the world champion long driver a couple of weeks ago. Also recently had one of your longtime students get through the Korn Ferry Tour and onto the PGA Tour. So pretty impressive stuff from Bernie the last couple of weeks. Anything else you want to add, Bernie?
Oh, well, I've been dealt a lot of great cards, I'm very blessed. I work at Caves Valley Golf Club in Maryland, as you mentioned, and I get to work with players of all abilities from age 8 all the way to 88 right now is my client base. And everybody's interested in hitting the ball longer. And through my teaching career, this is my 29th year teaching golf. It's hard to believe. So got a lot of gray hairs from watching bad golf swings and trying to think of ways to help players of all abilities, because no matter what, who's in front of you, if you can give them something to hit the ball better, especially if they can hit it longer, it's a tremendous experience for them. So with the help of Swing Catalyst, getting to learn a lot more about the biomechanics in the swing through your seminars, it's been very helpful. So I'm excited to be here with the panel. I think everybody here has so much to offer, and it's nice that we're getting together as a group and we have a lot of people interested in this topic.
Great. Thank you, Bernie. Yeah, a lot of people interested in this topic. So our attendees keep growing. As I said before, please put your questions in the question panel here and I will get to them. As we go as well, there is some polls I need to do. So I'm going to open up the first one right now. And so you should have that poll live. So please, if that pops up on your screen, answer that for us. Panelists, you don't need to worry about it. This is more for the people we know about you guys that are attending. So let's start with Josh. Josh, you have had a history of working on your own game, working on long drive. You've worked extensively with force plates. I know you had your own set of plates for a while, and we're working on getting you some more. And you also work with a lot of players that obviously come to you to gain speed because you've got so much speed yourself. So talk to me about some of the things you've learned from, using the ground or how to create speed from the work you've done on the swing catalyst system and force plates in general.
Yeah, so I started diving into it around 2020 was when we first started chatting. Really had no clue what I was looking at, and the biggest thing that I wanted to do was I had some thoughts about what I was seeing from guys like Kyle Berkshire and Jamie Sadlowski. So to some extent, I set out and tried to copy their swing from a two-dimensional standpoint. And so my biggest goal was to quantify and actually confirm whether I was right or, disprove and determine that I was wrong in that process. And so the interesting thing was, as we started going through that journey, we started realizing that I was really good at one particular thing. It was the braking force. So I think when we tested my braking force, Scott, I think I was the highest that you had tested to date. And one of the things that I was not as good at was actually loading into my trail side, or that horizontal side of it. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, one of the things I did throughout that 2022 year was I worked on loading into my trail side, and it actually got better, but I got slower and actually got hurt. So I ended up blowing out a disc, C6, C7. And I think there was a chain of events that happened. But I think throughout that process, one of the things that I started to learn was you have to be careful not to change someone's DNA too much, right? Like I was really good at that one particular thing. Mm-hmm. And actually getting better at loading made me slower and created a risk for injury. So I think looking back on that journey, it taught me to be a little bit more careful in terms of how you approach looking at some of the information and how you apply it to different students. The biggest thing that I think is different from the long drive world to the average golfer is the timing of when a lot of those forces are happening. So, starting at address, we see a lot of movement under the feet from a rocking standpoint. And if I had to say the biggest thing that helped me in the process was understanding how to get that pressure forward to the lead side a lot earlier. When I was growing up and I was taught to play golf, there was kind of two schools of thought that were moving around. One, you either stay stationary and try to control low point, or two, you create some lateral movement. And the problem was neither really felt right, because I either felt like by staying centered, I was giving up speed and power. And then anytime I tried to shift my weight to my trail side, I felt like I'd get stuck on my right side. So the interesting part of this journey was figuring out the timing elements of how I can actually accomplish both. So for me, it was understanding that by getting or creating a very early shift to my trail side before the club moved, gave me a lot more time as I wound up to actually get that pressure forward to the lead side. And looking at and understanding some of these dynamic sequences, I actually started to clean up a lot of the geometry. So, in my college days, everything was very geometry based, looking at a swing, trying to make sure that you were on plane, you know, videoing it, making sure it looked pretty. And the problem was the second you went out and stepped foot in any form of competition where there was pressure, it would break down. And so I knew there was something that wasn't right. To me, it didn't seem like there was any glue holding the whole process together. And so once I started kind of observing guys like Kyle and Jamie and looking at the dynamics, it all started to make a lot more sense to me.
Cool. So I think you said a lot of really good things there. Let me see. Let me just share my screen here because I actually dug up some old swings here of yours, Josh. So here's the day when you hurt your neck. It was about 40 degrees in Long Beach that day. It was a cold, not sure what time of year this was. I guess I could find out. It was the end of April in Long Beach, 2021. And so if you look at these forces here, I think basically I remember that day being there with Dana Dahlquist, and every long driver I had seen had all three of your forces, the horizontal, the torque, and the vertical at or above the tour average. And we kind of looked at this and said, all right, well, that one's way above the tour average vertical, torque's way above the tour average, but horizontal really isn't. And we kind of made a hypothesis, hey, let's try to add some of that horizontal force. And the interesting thing you were talking about there, you could see that you're kind of waggling the club, and your right pressure shift is basically done right here. So the ball's basically, or the club's barely moved off the ball and you're done your right pressure shift. And it's not a massive one compared to some long drivers, right? Some people get, close to 100% into the right side. You're kind of mid 80s into the right side. And I think that day was cold and your braking forces weren't ideal. So the braking force is this negative horizontal force that we're talking about here. If I go to the one where it was a little bit warmer here in Jacksonville, Florida, I believe this was in May of 2021, a little bit later. This is where you set the record for braking force. So you could see you have 60% of your body weight in horizontal braking. So you see how that net force vector arrow is pointed backwards. That's one of our braking mechanisms that we use to kind of stop the horizontal translation and get that into the golf club. So you're really elite at that, but we still didn't have a heck of a lot of horizontal push. So at what point did you kind of abandon ship on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me it was something I stuck to, work on throughout the end of 2021 and pretty long into 22. I don't typically jump ship. I'm someone that will, if I feel it's something I need to do, I can kind of stick it out. But I think as I got deeper in that journey, I started to realize I was getting a little bit to the opposite side of the spectrum. So in terms of my ability to get back to the lead side, it started being affected a little bit. And I also think too, like in that process, I started getting a little bit more in depth with working with like a physical therapist. So looking at certain dysfunctions that I had in my body, understanding that, and then trying to correlate that back to kind of what we observed from the plates in terms of the data. So my right side is not very good from like an internal rotation standpoint. So one of the things we see is a lot of times we see that my right foot rolling a little bit to the outside. I lose a little bit of that pressure under that right ball of the foot. But I think looking back, I think one of the ways I worked around that is I was very good at getting back to the lead side, right? At the expense of that loading. So, for me, by getting back to that lead side, I was able to use it. And the biggest thing that I found, it not just relating to speed, but also being able to control dispersion, was the sooner I hit that lead side, it basically got the handle working up faster. And for me, I felt like for the first time in my life, I was able to get the shaft back into a straight line at low point. Growing up, I was someone that had a ton of lag. And typically, like at impact, I'd almost have too much lag. And so by understanding how to utilize that, I started to actually be able to line the shaft up correctly, which obviously helped accelerate the club head, but more importantly, control dispersion. I think the injury was a big wake up call. I think like when I started having some injuries, I started questioning, hey, with what I'm trying to do, is this something I'm even capable of, right? So then it's there's sort of a process there where you're taking information that a physical therapist is telling you, and then testing it and going, okay, like um, this is working, or hey, this is not working, and then you start to draw some conclusions. But ultimately, I think I started abandoning it a little bit, when I realized the performance was regressing. So now these guys are so fast. I think Kyle just hit 241 miles an hour. So when you go from swinging easy and hitting balls 225 to feeling like I'm stepping on the gas, getting it up to 215, right? In your mind, that's very unsettling. So I think ultimately, once I kind of started seeing the regression from a performance standpoint, I started kind of getting back to what I was good at and changing my strategy.
Yeah, that's a very valuable lesson, because I've always said that for regular golfers. Like regular golfers, when I first started teaching with this stuff, people assumed like we're trying to get everybody to the tour average for all the forces and everything will be good. But we learned no, actually some people hit it better with a force a little bit lower and not as high. And we tried to make the kind of, I don't know, hypothesis that long drivers need everything above the tour average or above, or it's impossible to hit the ball that far. But that actually I don't think is the case, because I think with you, like you said, adding some of this horizontal force resulted in some worse things kind of happening. And if you look here, this is something we're learning a lot more about, is this kind of rolling to the outside of the trail foot on the backswing. That could be kind of a frontal plane issue in some people, so that could be kind of a sway issue, or it could be like an eccentric control of internal rotation, which is kind of like twisting that right foot into the ground. And that's what we're learning with the dual plates, is now we can measure that right foot twist force into the ground and how much we're kind of decelerating our pelvis moving backwards. And I think if we don't have that eccentric deceleration, that's when we kind of roll to the outside of our foot. So on these dual plates, we're now starting to learn a little bit more that not all rolls to the outside of the trail side. You can see how that, this is kind of one of your signatures, because when you set up, kind of there's your big toe, there's the inside of your foot. And as you swing, it kind of rolls to the outside. Now I'm thinking we probably should have gone a little more transverse plane in terms of that, but obviously we didn't have that information back then. But maybe we can get you back into the top five if we start working on some of that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Like I think there's an opportunity cost to everything. Maybe that's the right word, maybe it's not. But I think like let's just use that rolling as an example, right? So one of the things that happened was, yes, I got better at keeping that ball, the foot down, and that big foot, to where if we remeasured this last year, it was a lot better. But one of the things that ended up happening was now I wasn't able to get to certain range of motions that I was able to get to before. And that started to affect how the club was loading. So I think that, looking at those relationships and going, okay, yes, I can keep the ball, the foot down longer, and I think a lot of people would agree that's optimal, but what am I giving up because of that?
What was your thought to keep the ball of the foot, or the immediately inside of your foot, kind of on the ground?
I think there was just more focus and awareness around it.
Yeah, because I have seen people use like one of those little squishy balls and like put it under the foot so you can. And I think a lot of tools that people have used in the past are more kind of frontal plane tools to keep the foot on the ground. But I think that twisting, that kind of transverse plane thought, seems to be in some people, and the fact that adding horizontal force made your speed go down probably tells me you're not quite as much of a frontal plane guy. I mean, I think this is where I'm kind of starting to look at the positions the club gets into. And your hands are pretty high, so generally, the higher hands and the kind of steeper that net plane is down towards the ground, that would be more of a frontal plane person. But so these are the kind of things that we can start messing with and seeing, if you get your hands a little deeper and work on a more of a twisting force to the right side of foot, is that going to keep the speed up while keeping that inside part of the foot on the ground? I don't know. these are the kind of things we're starting to work through now that we've discovered with our dual plates. Have you worked on that, getting the club a little bit deeper and not quite as high? Because we find that is a good move
Yeah,
for a more rotational player.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I think the camera angle slightly low here, so I think it's a little bit. I don't think it was quite as high as it looks, but it definitely
Right.
was on the higher side. I think like 2022, the arms definitely started getting wrapped around the body more.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, the biggest thing that I recognized was the movements that I was trying to make from a ground reaction force standpoint in terms of loading. It, because of the lack of motion or range of motion that I had as a byproduct of it, it started to affect how the club was actually loading. So I think that in terms of the kinetics, a lot of the energy was being affected.
Kind of leaking out of the system. Good. So I got a couple of questions here that I think you're really good at getting to that lead side early and kind of spiking that vertical force and that horizontal braking force. So what are your favorite drills that people can use who struggle to get to their lead side and spike vertical force?
Actually, I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen the long driver Jeremy Nowak, but there's a move. Let me see. Can you guys see me all right? I don't know.
Let me stop sharing here so we get it a little bit bigger. So
Okay.
stop share. There we go. Yeah, go for it.
So one of the drills that I absolutely love right now is, let me grab I'll pretend this bottle bleach is my club. So basically you kind of kick your leg forward, you kick it back to create a lot of rotation in the pelvis. The thing I do like about that is by kicking that leg back, it's working on internal rotation, it's turning the pelvis. And then the cool part is once that happens, you actually have to replant that lead side forward. And what I found is the harder you actually replant that lead side forward, it actually starts to get your body unweighting a lot more efficiently. So once that left side kind of hits and you slam down, you actually start to see the right leg, right hip reflex. The center of mass is accelerating very quickly to the ground. And what I've seen from some of the testing that I've done is the unweighting values from a vertical force standpoint, you get a lot lighter through the transition, which is
Cool.
something that we've seen like from Bryson and Kyle and guys that are really good at that.
Super cool. And I think that unweighting is really important in creating like frontal plane momentum without creating excessive horizontal force. So we can get into that later, but let's move on to Fausty, because I was looking at your long driver and she does some pretty cool stuff with her unweighting. So tell me a bit, Fausty, about what you like to, or what your kind of thoughts are on things that you've learned from long drivers and that have also helped, regular Joes kind of create some more speed.
Yeah, for sure. I think Josh hit it with the DNA. Like, let's make sure that we know what your DNA is, and we don't need to be in that tour average or above tour average in all three, right? So everybody who comes in here is going to get measured first. So we're going to measure, we're going to see what's going on. We're going to do a couple of tests to see where are your strengths, where are your limitations of how you move just generally, and then how do you move swinging a golf club, because we all know it can be different, right? When we do that. So we want to make sure that we measure first, understand what do you like to see out of your strike? Do you like a draw, a fade, high, low? What are we trying to achieve? Because those ground reaction forces and the pressure trace is going to help us achieve some of that stuff, in addition to some technical things that we do with the club. But I always start with the pressure trace once we get through that. And let's make sure that we have some efficient pressure traces. So let's get a load to the trail side. Let's get that moving over to the lead side. And then depending on the club, if we're hitting driver, then we're going to see some unweighting of the lead side as we're pushing up and out of the ground. And that's what's going to kind of move that pressure trace back to the trail side. So it's not like we're hanging back, but because we've loaded so hard into the lead side, we get lighter onto that trail side as we come through. So Sophia here, she's fairly new to long drive and fairly new to golf. We started working a couple years together. She was a recreational golfer, just loved playing and got the itch of hitting some long drives. And we've added about 35 miles an hour ball speed in the last about 18 months or so. And She works really hard. So we really work hard. Obviously, very, very lucky to work with her. The physical attributes are through the roof. So we have a lot of fun of experimenting of, hey, I've got this hypothesis. If we do this with your pressure trace at this time, what do we think that's going to do to the club head? What is that going to do to our speed? Is that going to help our strike? Are we going to get more efficient, less efficient, that type of thing? And she's always a really good sport about it. And we have a great relationship with foam golf balls as we go through and we try this, because we don't know, it's a hypothesis. We don't know until we try it if that's going to really work for her. And so what we're really working on is maximizing our vertical, number one, and trying to hit our horizontal breaks sooner with her. Mm-hmm. And so this has been a journey for us to get through and have that lead leg slam down, post up, and then rotate around it. And so we made a lot of great progress, and we're going to make a little bit more progress this off season. But at this point, you can see the de-weighting, right? So we're only 65% of our body weight at this point as we're starting our transition mm-hmm. through. So this is helping Sophia really maximize the verticals and set her up for a pretty strong torque number as we come down, slam down, utilize that lower body to get through this. And I recently just got the dual force, so I'm super excited to learn a little bit more of each single leg and what are we doing here. And I'm really starting to take a look at what is that trail foot doing through the impact zone, and how much de-weighting are we getting on that trail foot,
right?
And what is that vertical coming through on that? So that's gonna be a lot of fun to learn and see if I change some of my methodologies based on what that data says.
Right. So I think what we're talking about here with the unweighting. So if I extend that net force vector up, and this is where her center of mass is, I just estimated where her center of mass would be, then her moment arm distance would be basically from here to here, right? So that would be her moment arm giving her frontal plane momentum into the system. But if we remember this green vector, this net green vector, it's a combination of horizontal force, about that much. So that would be her 27% horizontal force, this little line here, and vertical force right here, this would be her 65% vertical. But you'll notice we tried with Josh to add more horizontal force to make this vector lean over more and add more frontal plane momentum. But what we could have done, probably smarter, would have been just to get more unweighting. So if we could get more unweighting, and we take this vertical force and make it, let's say, 50%. So now let's say that vertical force is only 50%. Now our net force vector is this, and if I extend it through, I've just made my moment arm almost twice as long by creating 15% more unweighting and not adding any horizontal forces at all. And so I think this is where that unweighting becomes pretty important. And what I'm finding in a lot of good players and long hitters is they unweight the the minimum unweighting happens right at the peak horizontal. Because if my peak horizontal and minimum unweight are happening at the same time, I'm minimizing this and maximizing this, which is creating the longest moment arm I possibly could. So, and I feel like this doesn't feel like work for most people. That little bit of unweighting or loading down doesn't feel like they're pushing hard, right? They're just kind of like falling, kind of. Then you obviously have to have the ability to turn that around and get it going back up. But this, I think, is using physics to speed up the club rather than using kind of brute muscle effort, which is probably one of the mistakes we made with Josh, trying to get him to push more horizontally.
Yeah, for sure. When we talk about the unweighting, what you mentioned is we've got to be able to handle that force of the unweighting, the landing, mm-hmm. turning it around and going back up. Because if we're not strong enough to be able to handle the force coming down, turn around and pop it up, then we're going to be going down all the way through impact.
Too long, right?
It's a speed killer, right? That a lot of bad things happen. And
so what kind of training, I know you did Ben Shear's kind of mentorship program. So What kind of training, if somebody is bad at that, right? They get the unweighting, but they can't get back up in time, what's some things that you do to work on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Sophia has her own program, but we discuss a lot about it. But in here, what we work on is just landing first, right? So can we just land off of something that's either 6 inches or 10 inches that's going to be super safe? For somebody learning how to do this, can we land and not bounce, right? Not land and go like this, right? Can we land and handle that?
and not like jiggled at the bottom, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And Ben's got a great term for that. And we talked about that at the PGA show for my jump.
Right.
So yeah. So can we handle that? And then can we handle that and jump up? Right. So that's just the start. And then can we overload the fall and handle that? Can we overload the drop and then jump up? Can we overload both? And then can we move the fall higher?
Right.
As we progress, right? And that's one example. You know, speed skaters are really good, just going back and forth, but the single leg, it's helping us absorb, kind of handle the movement and then turn around and go. So those are some things. You don't need any equipment, body weight, just start there. Usually pretty safe.
Right. And how about the flywheel stuff? I know that to me, that always pops up in my head because I've worked on it before. And if you go down quickly, that thing tries to pull you through the floor, right? And you have to be able to handle it and pull it back up. So to me, those are one of the coolest new pieces of technology I think that can be helpful with this.
Yeah, flywheels are amazing with the eccentric overloading and really how much force you put in the concentric, you've got to be able to stop that force in the eccentric. And so that's change of direction and really being able to absorb some of the energies that you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's absolutely fantastic. When I added those, some of my athletes, I mean, we saw massive improvements within weeks. And it's pretty fun working on this.
Yeah, but coming back to the injury, obviously that you got to be ready to handle that because that's not where you start day one, right? You got to get some progression up to that. But she's really good at that. You can see from her unweighting to, 60% or so, 62, she still gets that force out of there. So she gets up to 220, before the club gets to parallel in the downswing. So she's still well early with that. And she almost matches Josh's horizontal braking force. So she's got 50% brakes, but as you see, it's a little late. We like to see the negative horizontal and the peak vertical happen at the same time. So her peak vertical is good, but the negative horizontal takes a little bit longer.
I think this is where the dual is going to come into play. And I'd love to see Josh on dual and see what the lead leg braking is. Mm-hmm. Because when I had single, for sure, I was, that negative horizontal peak, we really want that to be slamming down and matching our vertical. But now, now that I can measure both legs, it's like, maybe it's not as bad if we can manage it from the lead side. And the lead side is creating that break, but we're still pushing from the trail side. And is that a better way of looking at it? Which I'm not sure yet. Right on that.
Yeah, and if you do look at the lead side here, it's a lot closer. So there's her lead side braking peak, and it's a lot closer to the vertical. So that's a very interesting point, whether that's more important or the net force in terms of creating that braking strategy. One thing that I talked about with Josh, which I noticed in Sophia when I was looking through her earlier today, is now we can look at that individual leg twisting force. So if I go to torque person and put it on her right foot, this is her individually, like this is called the free moment in biomechanics terms. So if I put my foot on the ground and I twist it externally, that creates a net internal rotation force, which I think is a good braking force on the backswing. And hers is really interesting. It spikes super early and then it kind of trails off throughout the backswing, which I think is where we get some of the loss of connection of the right foot to the ground. If we look, I worked on this with Tony. Move this out of the way. This was back in, I don't remember when. There we go. This was back in February-ish, and you'll see Tony's braking force or that same thing. So as he takes the club away, it starts low and it kind of goes up to a peak right around where you'd consider deceleration in the backswing, right? So the arms are moving backwards and I want to start decelerating that. That's where my deceleration peak happens. And you see he gets it up to 34 force factor units, where Sophia, you can see hers gets high quick and then kind of trails off. So that might be a little energy leak. And even her right foot twisting is only 13 force factor units. So that might be something we start thinking about, is that try to twist that mat under her right foot externally on the backswing and see if we get a little more stability out of that trail leg.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that this dual plate has opened up to me, because when, when I was using the single plate, I thought I had a lot of good information. And then once I got the duals, now I kind of feel handicapped when I have to go back and work on a single plate. So there was a good question here that I would like, because this is kind of what you're working on with Sophia. So this person says, I play righty and it's really hard for me to post up on my left leg. My left knee bends towards the target, so it gets kind of a varus knee going through. And my left leg straightens well after impact. I'd like to get my left leg straightening just prior to impact. What can I do to enable that? Do you have any drills? Like what are things that people could work on?
Yeah, so I think this is pretty common, as we see with average golfers and not necessarily long drivers, but people trying to add some speed. Mm-hmm. And so there's a couple things that it could be. So it could be that we're just moving too late with our ground reaction force or pressure trace. We're getting to the lead side too late. And I think Josh's drill that he was showing was really, really good. Another one is we just might not be as active or as strong with that lead side. And we just need to add more energy to it. So yeah, I'll jump back here.
Yeah, go for it.
And just demonstrate what I try to do. Yeah, and see if I can. And so usually I have an X just like right back here behind the player. And what I'm trying to have them do is, as we're coming through into the hitting zone, is push out of the ground and move that foot back and finish on the left side. And so what we have to do in order to do that coming into the impact zone is we have to load this leg side, lead side much earlier in the swing, so we have time to get here and push out as we finish. So that's something that, just put a target out there, and 95% of the time we don't get close to the target, but we start utilizing this lead side much stronger throughout. The key point to that though is that the trail side has to match it. So the trail side has to continue pushing towards the target, or else you're going to get a hang back situation, and we don't want that. So you got to match that. But just energizing that lead side usually sooner and usually way more emphasis, and that kind of helps that slide go through.
On pushing back away from the golf ball, basically. Yeah. And I like that as an external cue, right? You just say, hit that target on the way through and see what happens.
Just finish with your foot on that X and stand on your left leg, and just try to, from there, it's problem solving, right? The golfer has to go through the problem solving,
figuring out how to stop it. Cool. Thank you, sir. That was awesome. All right. And now we will move on to Bernie. Bernie and I have worked together for a long time. We've traveled the world together, taught seminars. And, you've worked with Kyle since he was how old?
Since 2009. So
2009. So a long time.
It's been a while. Yeah.
And I remember
12.
He was 12 years old when you started?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So we have this older swing of Kyle's here from the PGA show in, I don't remember when this was. Let me check here. 2020. So this was just before the pandemic. Remember the pandemic hit a month or so after this. And one thing that we noticed from Kyle that we've been kind of preaching, and this is the stuff that, you can see, this is where we only had a single plate back then, so we couldn't see what each foot was doing. But you can see he's getting his peak braking force right where that peak vertical force happens. So if that's not happening, let's say we have an older player, somebody who's trying to gain speed, and either one or both of these are really late. What are some things that, because this was kind of our poster child for learning this thing, what are some things that you work on to try to get that to be more efficient?
Well, I think getting people at any age, the coordination with their footwork, but also where their spine motion is going, is a big part of this. Mm-hmm. And so, I think the battle we have with a lot of players, they're trying to turn, let's say, and they wind up their body without enough side bend. It's going to be pretty hard for them to make this maneuver because they're just not in position athletically to do it. And so I'll take them through different drills. A lot of times on the plate without the idea of swinging the golf club, I might just have them do some pivot drills and do some things along what Ryan was showing. And I would say that what I've been doing a lot of times I might even use an obstacle. So like if someone's shoulder plane's too flat, and let's say, for example, we look at them and they're not really generating enough horizontal force in the backswing. And I'm not saying that guarantees low horizontal force, but let's just say it's someone who has overdone the idea of turning and staying centered. Uh, they're going to tend to want to spin back the other way. And look, some of the greatest players in the history of the game did some of this. And, you know, so going back to it doesn't mean everybody's got to do this, but if we can find an area for them to sequentially move better and they understand it without the club, if it's a body cue, I think that works better. And then using the live pressures, especially in the detailed view, is really nice, I think, to do that. And then if you film the actual movement and show them that relationship, that now they know where to apply the force. And that's a big part of getting people to do it. But again, going back to why I think it's tough for a lot of people, they've never had the coordination in their footwork because, let's face it, most people have desk jobs. Most people aren't tuned into their lower body. And so now you're going to have to move them until you make that motion happen. And you might find yourself using an upper body cue to fix a lower body issue. And so much of the pressure we're applying on these plates is, you know, it's from many places, right? But if you adjust their pivot, especially in their upper body, you'll be amazed how many times you'll get to the better place faster with someone who's not, you know, super agile or an elite athlete. But regardless of what you're doing, I would also say that make sure you screen your players. I love, Ryan, that you do that. I know, Josh, I'm sure with anybody you work with, you're checking out their movement patterns because you got to know where they can go. And if you don't know how they're going to move, or you assume they can move a certain way, that's easy way for someone to get hurt. So I think whatever we're doing, and one thing I like to do is I just ask enough questions to find out what's your athletic background, any injuries, because that's going to tell me a lot about how they're probably going to move. And if I know they played tennis, for example, I know the tennis motion. I played a lot of tennis growing up. If they played baseball, whatever sport it might be, I want to know so I can tap into that motor pattern in a way so they can relate to the movement. And that's a lot of what I do to get these things to move.
Cool. So another thing that we've noticed with Kyle, and I think Kyle was the first one who kind of brought this to our eye because it was so dramatic when he used to kind of move his feet up and down before he took the club away. So what I've noticed from pretty much everyone who hits the ball a long ways is there's a lot going on between the feet and the ground before the club actually moves. And so you can see like Kyle here is creating way above tour average horizontal force and the club's still sitting behind the ball. It hasn't moved yet. And it's when this left foot comes and hits the ground the second time. So he goes to his right side and then, or sorry, the right foot hits the ground the second time is right where that club starts to move away from the ball. So I've seen this quite often that right at this point here where the force crosses zero, so they get kind of all their negative work done before the club moves. So you can see how that green arrow is pointed away from the target, away from the target, away from the target. And as soon as that club starts to move away from the ball, that green arrow is pointed forward the whole time. So he's creating force directed, or reaction force directed towards the target the whole time. Do you use that with other players too? Some kind of a I don't know, rocking-ish, whatever you want to call it?
Sure. And you know what I'd say to everybody is, even at 12 years old, Kyle had the same movement pattern, and you'll see it with the athletes. They start forward to go backward. I mean, it's in all sports. But for your I don't want to sound negative with this, but for your non-athletes, the people that didn't play sports where they had dynamic movement patterns, the folks that just ran cross country straight ahead, you can teach them that maneuver, and it's life-changing. I had a guy go from hitting his 7-iron 145 yards to 160, and he was the happiest guy on the planet with this little pressure shift
on
an iron shot. And then he said to me, well, I'm afraid I'm going to miss the ball on the driver. I said, well, give it a try. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
He went and hit a tee ball 250 yards, and he couldn't fly it 225 if his life depended on it. And the interesting thing about this, a lot of people kick on something they never take advantage of, which is their rhythm and timing when they get that motion before they swing versus standing there statically.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm all for giving people motion before they swing. Kyle just got smoother with this, and this is something he took and accentuated, and you can see he's modified it a little bit since then, and obviously since the first world championship he won. But I think if you go back in time, watch Ben Hogan hit drivers, especially when he was going to hit one hard, you'd see him do some of these maneuvers. And the game of golf always has different examples, but it's a great way to get people to flow in the early part of their swing and gain momentum in a direction that's going to help them hit the ball better.
Good. And I like, Josh, if we look at your swing the same way, if I go back to the very start, so I try to set these things so I can start to see, you get a lot more torque happening in your kind of pre-shot routine. So if you look at Kyle's, his torque stays pretty, static. There's not a whole lot happening there till right before, where you get a lot of torque. And if I look at Martin Borgmeier's swing, he has tons of torque happening, torques and verticals, and not a whole lot of horizontal stuff happening. So if we look at Martin here and we go back to the start, you can see, this is not the one. Let me find the one where we had him. There we go. So he's getting almost tour level vertical forces right here, and this massive torque kind of move before he takes the club away. So if you watch him, it's not as much a side to side rocking, and it's more of you watch him kind of the toe comes up, toe goes down. So it's more of a vertical and a torque type of cue. Do you think of that at all, Josh, or is that just something that naturally happens?
No, that's interesting. I'd be curious to see what it looks like now. I sort of have a interesting cadence to my trigger. So obviously inspired by Kyle, I try to feel like when I set up, let me tilt this down a little bit. So obviously the foundation is the lateral motion, but one of the things I try to feel is like as I'm rocking, I try to allow the club to actually counter in the opposite direction. Just like if I was going to hold this here and kind of rock back and forth, you'd see that once I move left, this would actually sort of trail. If I move to my right, it would kind of trail. So I try to kind of recreate that with the club so that it's sort of rocking. The club goes down, I hit my right side, and then I start. And it's been interesting. So obviously in long drive, we're hitting really whippy shafts, and every year they keep getting whippier and lighter. And this year I went to a shaft that was 190 CPMs, so pretty much a ladies flex shaft, and it was 40 grams. And it was interesting to watch how it changed my loading pattern off the ball. What ended up happening was because the shaft was so flexible and light, my loading pattern turned more into like hands dragging back like this, because the head was heavy relative to the shaft, versus back in some of the videos you have, it would actually, I'd almost start the head back first. And so yeah, it's just been interesting looking at, how that cadence and trigger can be affected by shaft and shaft weight. And actually just for fun, once our season ended, I went and pulled out the same shaft I was hitting from 2021, and I was able to actually feel some of the same feels that I was sort of searching for, that I couldn't recreate. So yeah, it's been an interesting process. But yeah, I mean, I think getting that cadence down at address is so important. I think especially, for me, for someone who came from like very mechanical background, the hard part about golf is the ball is stationary and there's such a premium on contact. And so a lot of times, golf becomes less reactionary. So for me, by implementing a lot of this stuff and sort of figuring out my own cadence, like Bernie mentioned, it started golf started feeling athletic again to me, which being a decent athlete, you want to be able to utilize that, not take that away.
Cool, that's awesome. Thank you. Bernie, we'll get back to you really quickly and talk about your kid here you sent us, Tommy Sharps. So this was a recent lesson you had. Looks like yesterday, Halloween,
Yeah, it
right,
sure was. And it
right
was an
before he went
interesting lesson.
trick-or-treating, looks like.
I think he's grown out of that a bit. He was a senior in high school and didn't seem like he was ready to take off, because towards the end of the lesson, we had a massive jump in speed,
Okay.
which was
So I got one of the swings here that has 1 star, and this was 115 miles per hour and 269 carry, 170 ball speed.
Yeah.
And then later on, we went to 122 club speed, 292 carry, and 181 ball speed. So walk us through kind of what you saw. This guy's not a long driver. This is just a high school kid looking for some more speed. What did you see in the ground reaction force pressure trace things that led you to make the changes you did?
Well, I think what you see here that jumps out immediately to me is the horizontal force graph.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you just looked at this swing in 2D,
Mm-hmm.
and you put it side by side, if you do the 1 star versus the 3 star and you got
Mm-hmm.
rid of the forces, I think what's really cool about this is it'd be very difficult for someone to look at the picture,
Right.
or at any point in the swing, if you didn't tell them what took place, and say, wow, there was a big difference here.
Other than it got darker
Yeah, I
and he took his
apologize.
hat off.
Yeah, well, that's there's a reason for that. But
Right.
if you went just to the top of the swing, I don't know if you could sync those up.
Yeah, I can. I just got to set the lines here.
Sorry.
There
But
we go.
I think what you'll see here,
There
and
we
this is the
go.
beauty of having these force plates, is you can get information that there's just no way in this still picture or a 2D video you'd know what's going on.
Right.
I mean, you might be able to guess a little bit here, but if we go up near the tail end of his backswing, so a little short of parallel there.
Yeah. The one thing I do notice is his hands look like they're a little higher than they were here. I mean, that could be a camera angle, but interesting. And if you did add horizontal force, that's a great matchup, right? To have the hands a little higher.
Yeah. So the camera didn't move, and he's virtually hitting from the same spot.
Right.
So what I want you to see, though, if you put the forces back on,
Okay.
and we just focus on the horizontal force.
Sure. And there we go. Okay. Interesting.
So this really stuck out at me. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I say that, I was explaining to him, he was, if you watch him, he's got a tendency to do almost a fake finish there that Ryan was describing, where someone hops back who hasn't quite gotten forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Because he's mimicking, like a lot of the young players now. They're studying the long drive and they're trying those moves. So I was saying to him, because his miss was kind of a low pull hook, and he could get wipey. And I said, we have to get your lower body working better so that you can support your release. Because the harder you swing, and by the way, he's in the gym working out now, trying to get faster. But putting a faster engine in a car without good brakes is generally a recipe for disaster if you don't address this. So anyway, we did some work, and I was showing him a couple different swings, and I said, if we could get you to use your trail leg better, it's going to help you repeat a lot better. You're not going to have these big misses. So we address this, and you can see obviously a difference in the combined horizontal force. You go back
definitely
to just
big difference. Yeah.
And my cue for him was getting him to feel like he was pushing my dual plate. I have dual plates in there. I know it's tough to see because it's hard, but trying to push the dual plate on underneath his right foot into the parking lot behind my teaching bay.
This way, yeah.
And the thought of that, almost like a pitcher's mound for him, where he could really apply pressure there, especially through the backswing as he was going into transition. really helped him a bunch. And the best way to put it, he started going faster and faster. Again, I'm not here saying, hey, let's go faster with the club today. I'm saying let's get the sequence better. And all of a sudden, speed jumped.
Right.
Went from 15 to 18, 19. And then, the last couple, he's like, let me try to get fat. I want to break 122. I'm like, go ahead, have fun. It's Halloween, unleash. I'm leaving
Right.
after this next one. But
Right.
anyway, it was very interesting to see this. And I thought, you know what, I better show this to the master of force data here at Swing Cap.
Right.
So
That's super cool. And so
Yeah.
your cue for him was just to try to push this plate under his right foot towards the parking lot over here. So try to
Yep.
push your foot into the ground that way. Good. So in the past, I know and it's interesting to me that, adding this horizontal force to him added speed and, made him hit it further. Whereas, we tried it with Josh as well, and that kind of slowed him down. So that's where, really understanding the DNA of the player and what they can do is important. Because I remember with Josh, we were able to add some horizontal force. I put like a band around their waist and kind of pull them in this direction. So instead of them pushing this way, I pull them so they have to react and push in the opposite direction. That's another good drill you can do, because that was one question James had for a right side dominant golfer. How do we maximize the ground reaction force? What are the drills? So what else would you use there, Bernie, that you could to maximize that if that horizontal force is lacking?
Yeah, sometimes I'll take, like I told him in his next session, we're going to go on the slide board in my gym area
Okay.
and just work those movements on the slide board, try to get those muscles warmed up for him so he can tune into them better as he practices. I mean, I love using resistance from the standpoint of letting them know where to pull or push.
Right.
So depending on the player, I'm going to use those to cue them. And at the same time, if you don't have it, giving them that goal, like I was saying, hey, just go ahead and push that right plate away from the left plate.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty cool to see. And obviously, what I'm describing here is, something that right away he could do pretty quickly. I mean, his sequence changed, the speeds went up.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. It shows you how important that is for him.
Yeah, and you can see here where he reaches minimum vertical, he's only at 4% horizontal, so he's not putting a whole lot of that frontal plane momentum into the system.
Yeah.
Whereas when it gets darker here, as he gets to minimum vertical,
I didn't switch out players, Scott.
He's actually minimized. He's done a lot more unweighting too, without even talking about it, which is interesting. Because you'd think to push that plate laterally, you almost have to flex into that right knee a little more and unweight, like Josh was talking about earlier. So he's gone to more unweighting, and now he's at 16% horizontal when he reaches minimum vertical. So to me, that's an incredible change, and that's where we see the differences happen between 122 club speed and 115 club speed, or 269 carry and 292 carry. So that is a massive change. Thank you so much. I had a blast. Hopefully people on this call learned something, and hopefully all three of us are going to continue to work together in the future and keep learning more stuff now that we got our dual plates, and we can really put all this in motion to help people hit it longer and stay safer and enjoy this game a little bit more. Thank you everyone for joining. As I said earlier, the next one will be November the 16th, Thursday, November the 16th at the same time. 5 p.m. West Coast time, 8 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have Jason Bale joining us, Ryan Hawley from Canada joining us, and Joe Plecker from Savannah, Georgia joining us. Both of those, or all three of those people, work with really high-level players and not as good players. So it's kind of, I hear a lot of people talk about, oh, well, these swing calips are only for really good players. So we're going to talk about some of the things we learned from the PGA Tour players and the Champions Tour players and the Korn Ferry Tour players, and how we then apply that to our, our regular Joes, our regular member golfers. So I know all you guys do the same thing, and we had some really interesting discussions. Thank you so much for your time, and we will see you guys down the road, hopefully at the PGA show for all of you.